welcome to another video. Today I have to be pretty quiet because it's the middle of the night. However, there is plenty to talk about as today is Feature Pack Day 2. A bunch more news has come out about stuff that's coming up in the feature patch just around the corner, and even beyond that as well, there's been a little bit of news to do with PvP stuff in the game, so let's keep caught up. I'm going to run you guys through exactly what ArenaNet have announced. There was a lot of discussion yesterday about the changes they're proposing just for the traits. You know, they didn't announce many traits yesterday, and yet there were so many people saying, oh, they're buffing this, they're nerfing this, and today they released a lot more information about balance type stuff, so I'm very curious how you guys will take it. And yeah, let's just jump straight in. First, I'll tell you guys about the PvP thing. Aside from information coming up about the feature pack, the devs did announce today that there's going to be a tournament in PvP going on in which you can win, drumroll, a legendary. And not only that, if you come second, say if your team comes second, third, fourth, you can get a lot of really nice rewards too, including like gifts of mastery, components for creating legendary weapons, including precursors, and they're giving away Black Lion tickets as well. So far in Guild Wars 2, really the only rewards ever for PvP tournaments have been in the order of gems, gem codes that usually the devs give away to try and incentivize the community somehow. I believe there may have been 1 or 2 tournaments ever that were completely player hosted and they gave away good stuff at the end. But here, directly from the devs, you guys can get legendaries. If that doesn't get some of you, typically PvEers, but who also might find fun in PvP, to try out PvP, I don't know what will. You have plenty of time to form a team and run into this. It's completely standard rules. That means it's 3 rounds, best out of 3, the team goes forward. There's going to be 5 players per side, and the tournament begins for North America on May the 2nd to the 3rd, and in the European regions on April the 26th to the 27th. So you've got about a month at the very least before it begins. However, there are only 16 teams that will enter for each region. So overall, we're looking at 32 different groups of 5 people that can come into this tournament, which is quite a lot, but only 16 per region, and sign-ups begin on April 4th. Because the rewards are so huge for this, I'm sure it will fill up almost instantly. Be there, or be square, on April 4th. That's when sign-ups go up, and I guarantee you guys by April 5th, it will probably be closed. Letting you all know, and do keep that in mind when we talk about a lot of the balance stuff that's changing and new things announced for the feature patch. Don't forget that this tournament is happening after it goes live, and so all these changes will affect the meta and shake things up quite a lot. It means that even the really hardened people at the top, if they've been out of their game for a little while, they're now also playing in a totally new meta, and there is opportunity for you. If you haven't PvP'd for a long time, or maybe even ever, there is a bit of an opportunity to get in there, find some cool stuff, and rock face. Alright, so that aside, we had 2 new articles go up on the website, plus a live stream, one of the Ready Up live streams you guys might remember. I said there were going to be 2 because they have so much to talk about. The first of those has come out, as well as 2 new articles. One of the articles, the more boring one, I'm going to do right now. So, and why is it boring? Because it's stuff we've already heard about. This is the changes to crit damage, which I will cover just for completionist's sake. These were things that we heard were in the works quite a while ago. Again, I believe it was from a live stream this was originally talked about. This is how ferocity is coming into the game. I'll whiz through this for you guys who already know, but crit damage is changing in Guild Wars 2. Currently it is king for DPS. DPS is all that matters, and the best way of doing DPS is through crit damage. So in order to at least add a bit more variety to DPS builds, they're bringing crit damage down slightly. This isn't a way for them to say introduce support or control. This is just to add a bit more variation to the DPS side of things, right? Which I agree with them doing. So crit damage is being culled by about 10% in effectiveness. At the same time, similar to how we currently build precision to get crit chance, they're adding a new stat called ferocity, which you build to get crit damage. So precision builds crit chance, ferocity builds crit damage. And now whenever you equip a piece of gear in Guild Wars 2 that would have before had a flat crit damage amount on it, instead it's going to say ferocity, and that does normalize a lot of things. Right now there's some weird stuff you can do with builds and gear where you only have certain items as crit damage because you get a higher percentage on them for whatever reason. That's all getting normalized now. There should be a screenshot on the background of a rune set, I believe it's the rune of the eagle that they put up on the blog post, where you can see very clearly now there's no flat pluses to percentages. It's all very nice and clean, and it's okay, I'll get extra precision, extra ferocity, and so on. So it's all getting unified through ferocity. People who are maybe on Zerk stats are now annoyed that they're getting 10% less in effectiveness. Do consider Zerks is still going to be one of the best ways to do damage, if not the best way to do damage. It's just that that gap is now a little bit less so you don't have to feel like you've wasted your money buying a Zerk set. There is some legitimate concern concern here, though, that I do want to air at the same time. One of the reasons they've stated they're adding ferocity to the game is it allows them to, in the future, create ferocity major stat gear, just as we've got precision major stat gear. Currently, there is no gear in Guild Wars 2 that is like crit damage weighted. However, after this patch and sometime in the future, there could be ferocity stat weighted things, and those do have the potential of being better than Zerks. And so there are legitimate concerns that maybe it wasn't worthwhile getting Zerks, but that stuff's not in the game yet. So do consider that if you're still trying to buy your gear, because you're not going to get compensated for it. It's just a risk that you have to take. A couple of other little clarifications this blog post makes. I just told you guys that crit damage was going down by 10%. That's actually only in PvE and World vs. World. The balance that they've got set up in PvP, they quite like where crit damage is right now, and so that's remaining unaffected, which I do enjoy. There's very little spike gameplay going on in the Guild Wars 2 PvP meta at the moment, so to nerf crit damage even more would just make it all this hybrid pool of sludge that I think a lot of people are quite bored with anyway. So it's unaffected in PvP. Also, they're changing the UI slightly. Some of you might not even know this. Even if you have 0 crit damage, you still have plus 150% damage when you manage to crit an enemy. When you're building crit damage on your build, it's just going on top of a base amount of 150%. So if I have 60% crit damage listed on my hero panel, I actually have 210% crit damage. It's just not showing you the base. Well, now, to sort of reflect the fact that the base exists, they're changing the UI to incorporate that base 150% as well. So now, if you log in game and you see that you've got 300% crit damage, you haven't actually got more crit damage than before. It's just that the original 150 has been added there. And I quite like it, because I feel like a lot of the people that are going to complain that they've lost 10% might also at the same time now think, oh, I thought I was going to get nerfed, but I haven't been, because they didn't realise, and then they'll just go on about their merry way. I do think it's nice, and it makes things slightly less obscure too. One other thing that they touched on, which was another worry for people about these changes when they originally announced them before, was Celestial Gear. Celestial Gear in the game is the set that gives you every single stat, and currently it actually gives you quite a nice amount of crit damage. Really, it's the only reason why you go for that gear set. It gives you higher crit damage than anything else. However, once Ferocity comes in, and if that were to all get normalized, Celestial Gear would really go downhill, and there'd be very little point in wearing it, and people who bought it obviously would feel cheaped out. So to address it, ArenaNet aren't leaving the crit damage value on it the same as before. Instead, they are flatly boosting the amount all of those stats give you, which I do think is worth it, because you're very mediocre if you're running in Celestial stuff, and now hopefully that will push you just above, and the combination of all your stats will, in theory, make you better than other players. So there will still be a place for it, and they're just buffing it universally. That's their answer to this concern. And again, for PvP, they're buffing it even more, because it's really bad in PvP. No one ever runs it in PvP, and now all of those values are going up also. And I can imagine, especially for amulets in PvP, I might start running a Celestial Jewel most of the time. It depends how much it goes up. But that's pretty much it. As I said, that's the boring one. That's the stuff that we basically already knew, and this is them putting it out there in stone, not in some weird place in the middle of a live stream, not something that you browse through Reddit or your friend told you. It's right there on the webpage now. These are the changes to crit damage. In addition to this, today they released a second update. I wonder if we're going to get 2 per day. It looks like on Tuesday next week we get 2, and then there's a couple of other days that they've got 2 set up. But the second one for today, don't let me go too off topic, is on runes, sigils, and balance updates. These are the other changes to gear that are coming in the game beyond ferocity and crit damage stuff. Every single rune set in Guild Wars 2 has been looked at and been changed in some way. All of them. There's a lot of different rune sets out there. And mainly the reason for this right now is runes are pretty cool. Like, they can be an interesting part of your build, but there's a lot of really, really terrible ones that you never run. And you can see this on the trading post. There's a lot of runes that cost tons and tons of money, and then the vast majority of them that you can swim around in cost pennies because no one's ever interested in them. And it's because a lot of them were designed in weird ways. Probably one was designed when the game was very first being made, while one was being designed a week before release. And the way they proc different effects or the way they give you different statistical boosts is just all over the shop. Sometimes you can equip a rune set that doesn't feel like it impacts your build in any way, and sometimes you can equip a rune set that gives you some ridiculously significant advantage. They're trying to make it so that picking your runes is a more interesting decision than it has been in the past. On top of this, they're changing the way they view mixing and matching rune sets. Now, my experience of this has been that in PvE, and in World vs. World, a little bit in World vs. World, I guess, but I nearly always just go for a full set of 6 because you can really specialize into one specific area and you get that tier 6 bonus is usually quite strong. I've always just gone with a full set of 6 in PvE and World vs. World. However, in PvP, when I'm min-maxing a little bit more, when I maybe want to play a might stack build somehow, like HGH Engineer was a really popular one for a while, I would actually mix and match different sets so that I could, get a lot of boon duration on might in this example. The only time I ever mixed and matched sets was in PvP. However, they've made a change here, and basically they're saying the idea of mixing and matching was a little bit too complicated. Many of the changes they're making are in an attempt to sort of streamline what it is to play Guild Wars 2 and make things easier for new players. And I don't agree that just a single one of these changes will make a night and day difference for a player, but all of them together, I can understand where they're coming from, that if they keep streamlining things, it will make it a more pleasurable experience overall. And this is one of those changes. Their plan now is to always encourage people very, very, very heavily to just get the full 6 set, and like the idea of mixing and matching isn't something they really want in the game. That does cause us to lose a little bit of depth, and I don't mind in general as long as it's still an option. But the funny thing that they've announced in this blog post is for PvP's purposes, it is now impossible to mix and match. The only game type where I ever wanted to mix and match, it's now impossible to mix and match, and instead you just get a single slot for all your runes. You just put one rune in and it will apply it across your entire character. There is still the idea of having to get all 6 runes for PvE and World vs. World, and I'm sure that the reasons why you don't get a single slot there now are economy based and just RPG based. It's nice to get your first rune and then maybe a little bit later get enough money for another rune and then another, particularly on your first time going through the game. I can understand why they've left that. But in PvP, that is now not an option anymore, which is a shame. It's not a huge issue for me. I'm certainly not playing any builds right now that would want me to mix and match, but it is a shame. On the plus side, making a build in PvP now is actually a fair bit easier. You can just drag a single rune over into a slot and be done with it. With the amount that I found myself constantly changing builds in PvP, it did become an utter chore to constantly have to go over to that vendor, keep clicking the rune 6 times or 12 times because you have to double click each time, and go in your inventory, double click, apply, apply, double click, and on and on and on. Now it's just one slot, and I actually think that once I get to experience it in game, I'll be quite happy for the extra convenience. But this is their philosophy when they went through and looked at every single rune in the game. They're rebalancing them so that you're never even going to want to mix and match. All the really nice bonuses are attached to the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th tier of runes. If you try and mix and match, then you're going to get all the rubbish tier 1 and tier 2 bonuses and not be as strong as you could be. They made a sort of a fluffy statement about how when they were looking through all of the runes, they wanted each set to have a very clear purpose and impact on your build. And though it's a slightly fluffy statement, I do agree with the point that there are many rune sets out there that really just feel like they're not doing anything for you. As an example of this, there's a rune set in the game, Nightmare runes. You get these from doing Twilight Arbor, and the tier 6 on them is a 5% chance to cause fear to an enemy when you are hit. That 5% is really rare. It could go a long time without over-proccing, and now they have moved this up to 50% without even affecting the cooldown, as far as I'm aware. This actually has 2 benefits. It means, number 1, the person who's running the runes gets to feel them impacting the fight a lot more, and number 2, from a PvP perspective, I hated this rune set because whenever I got feared by it, like say I got feared off of a ledge at Clock Tower, it was really annoying because it felt like one of those really no-skill, passive proc things that the guy I was fighting had no control whatsoever that it was going to happen, and now he gets this massive advantage out of it. And, you get salty about that. However, now that it's on a 50% proc chance, I get feared off and I just think, okay, well, fair enough, that's going to happen quite a lot. It's not like some really low random RNG reason why he beat me. It was because he chose some smarter runes than I did for the terrain we were fighting on, for example. That I actually quite like. And this is just one example, but basically any runes you can see out there in the game at the moment, they've got a really low chance to do something. For example, summon a bomb when you've been hit, cleanse a Condi if you've been hit. Many of these, they're all going up in their rates, and I'm sure some other rune sets that are really bad at the moment might get new functionalities that include stuff like that. Another big thing that they mentioned in this article that wasn't really talked about before, there is now no longer any difference between PvP runes and PvE runes. I find the way they describe this quite suspect though. They seem to talk about it from a balancing perspective. What I'm most curious about is, does this mean that now in PvP we will have the same amount of runes as they have in PvE? In PvE there have been more runes being added to the game for a long time now. None of those have ever come to the PvP game type. There are even runes that were taken out of PvP early on, like the runes you get for completing Cordicus's Manor, the runes of altruism, I believe, these were removed from PvP, or just were flat never there in the first place, and you can't use them, even though they would actually be quite nice for certain builds. Again, surprise, surprise, might stack builds. And so this comment where they say there's no difference anymore, are they saying the runes that are there have no balance changes, or are they saying all runes are in all game types now? I hope, obviously, that it's the latter. That, again, is going to open up even more build diversity, even more opportunities to create interesting comps and shake up the meta. Sadly, that's all the information we really got on runes. You know, I was sort of hoping we'd get to see a bunch of the new ones, you know, talk about some of the completely revamped ones that they were bigging up before in a previous live stream. We don't get to see. I have a feeling one of the reasons for this is because of economy style stuff. There's a lot of really crappy runes out there that if they reveal on a blog post, oh my god, these are going to be amazing. People are going to start speculating, buying high and low, but I would have loved just to have a little bit more information. That's not all that we've got on the blog post though. They also talk about sigils a fair amount. So point number one, so some of this is well known to people as well because this was highlighted, like their crit damage changes. Number one, you're now going to get 2 sigils on 2-handed weapons, so that's going to open up a lot more combinations for people. I will come back to this though because they announced something new in this blog post that just is crazy to me. Anyway, you get 2 sigils on 2-handed weapons now, and the internal cooldown on sigils that have a proccing effect has now been removed. Many sigils in Guild Wars 2 activate under a certain circumstance. Did you just crit an enemy? Well then, okay, it's going to activate. Did you just weapon swap? Then it's going to activate. Things like this. It used to be that if one was on recharge because it had just activated, all other sigils you were using would also be on recharge. And this meant that many of the times in the builds it was a bad idea to go for 2 different sigils that proc. For example, like a newbie mistake to do would be to take 1 sigil of fire and 1 sigil of air, and you'd be like, yeah, I'll just do all of this crazy stuff, and only one of them ever procs. Or even worse, say take 2 weapon swapping sigils and you're only ever going to get the effect of 1. Those cooldowns have now been split off, so no matter what sigils you're using, as long as it's not 2 of the same sigil, they'll be proccing. That's really exciting, opens up some big stuff. Last I was in PvP, I was playing like a nuki build that relied on some of these types of sigils, and I really want to go back in there and test them out. So that's pretty huge. Again, if you're running 2 of the same sigil, it won't work. So you can't use like 2 fires, but you can use fire and air together, for example. Also, they have a weird comment here where they say, for people that don't know, the way that Guild Wars 2 works right now, if you're in PvE or World vs. World, and you have a Bloodlust sigil, or one of these weapon stacking sigils, and you kill something, then it gives you 1 stack. And once you've got 25 stacks, it maxes out, and that's it, right? While if you're in PvP, if you kill a player, it will stack 5 instantly, and this is because you're killing things much more rarely in PvP, and it just makes sense. Those sigils would be terrible if they worked in any other way. And now in this blog post, they take the time to say this to us, okay? On-kill sigils, those sigils which trigger when you kill something, have received an update as well. The functionality of each sigil has changed so that killing a player is worth 5 stacks of a sigil in any game mode, while killing a monster grants only 1 stack. This is really weird. Why would they go out of their way to say this? Basically what they're telling us by saying in any game mode, to me means, okay, in World vs. World, now also if you kill a player, you get 5 stacks. Couldn't they have just said in World vs. World? It's very odd wording that seems to suggest somehow we could kill players in PvE too, and obviously we can't. Now, you could be conspiracy tinfoil hat dude right now and be like, oh, this is proof that they're adding some kind of player killing thing in the feature patch later on. I don't buy that, but it's kind of weird that they spent so long. The more important thing about this type of sigil that they do announce though, this type of sigil will have more strict rules applied to them. Don't forget, most of these changes are giving us a lot more freedom with our sigils and our builds. These will have more strict rules applied on them, so that a player will no longer be able to gain 25 stacks and then unequip the sigil. The only reason a lot of people run stuff like Bloodlust and Accuracy and Life and Momentum is because of the fact that you can stack it to 25, completely unequip the weapon, equip a new weapon with a better sigil, and then run around with the benefits of all of it. Obviously, if you die, then you lose it and you've got to swap back, and it's a little bit of maintenance, but like, that's a pretty interesting and cool, in my opinion, element of the gameplay. They're now removing that entirely. Now, let's remember what they did above with the 2-handed weapons getting 2 sigil slots. That was to give us more freedom, but now that we can't remove a Bloodlust sigil, for example, from our weapon, what does that mean? Especially for characters that can't weapon swap. It means that I would go from an Elementalist that was running 1 staff with Bloodlust on it, then swapping to a staff with, say, Fire on it, to now having a single staff that has Fire on it and Bloodlust on it. There's no difference at all. I don't get any of that extra freedom because now they've given me a new slot, but then they've also told me that new slot has to have your Bloodlust Sigil in it anyway. So build-wise, it hasn't changed anything for me. Things are a little bit freer for people who can weapon swap freely, and you've got plenty of slots to play around with there. 4 Sigil slots instead of just 2 that the Engineer and the Elementalist get, but I think it's a shame that this has changed. It could open the path for one other thing though, and that's that right now you can only have Bloodlust active, or Life active, or Momentum active, and so on. Now, with this change where you can't unequip and still get the benefits, they could, in theory, allow you to stack up as many as you like. So you could have, for example, Bloodlust and accuracy on together for a total of plus 250 power and 250 precision. And let's take that even further. What if you're on a class that can weapon swap, which most people are, and then you have 4 sigils like this? You have a Sigil of Life on, you have a Sigil of Momentum on, you've got all of them, and now all of a sudden you've got plus 1,000 stats to various different things. Combine that with the new Celestial gear, I don't know, maybe you could have some fun there. But it's just a little bit of speculation from me. Now that they have removed that limit, it does mean that maybe we should be able to stack more of them together should we wish to. Alright, so again, just like with runes, they did go through and assess every single sigil in the game. Many changes will have been made. Even really popular sigils have had changes made to them. I've been talking about the Sigil of Air and the Sigil of Fire a lot today. Fire is far better than Air in Guild Wars 2. Why? Because Air is single target and Fire is AoE. Now, in regular games, you'd expect the one that's AoE to do slightly less damage, so there's incentive to go for the Sigil of Air, right? Well, that's not the case in Guild Wars 2. The Sigil of Air does have higher base damage, but it's so insignificant. It's almost non-existent, and so all players have always gone for Sigils of Fire rather than Sigils of Air. Changes have been made here. Number one, both of them have a much higher chance to proc now, just a 50% chance to proc, and to incentivize people running the Sigil of Air instead of the Sigil of Fire, instead of upping the base damage on Air, they dropped the cooldown. Fire has a 5-second cooldown, Air has now got just a 3-second cooldown. So if you want lots of lightning strikes hitting someone, then you can go for Air. If you want the AoE damage of Fire, then you can stick with one of those sigils. And imagine these kind of tweaks basically across all sigils out there. There is another big change to sigils that have proccing effects on things. Currently in the game, pretty much anything that procs by attacking something procs on crit. This makes many sigils useless, like the Sigil of Water, which heals players around you when it procs. But the thing is, it only procs on crit. So to make good use of that sigil, which is really a supporty build sigil, you know, a sigil for healing people up, you're going to need precision in your build so that you can get the crit, so that you can actually proc the sigil a lot. And that's just not going to be worth it. Yes, they've added Valkyrie armor into the game now, but you're not going to be the best supporter you can be by running into precision. Many sigils were like this that were just completely balked. That is now no longer an issue. Many sigils will just proc on hitting things at a much higher chance rather than when you crit them. And it makes me curious. I wonder whether Air and Fire are actually now going to be proccing on hit or on crit. Because if they're now proccing on hit, it means certain content against like structures and mega bosses out in the world could be easier, because they do account for quite a fair bit of DPS, especially if you put them on an entire Zerg. So yeah, that's going to, again, open up a lot of options for builds. Tons of sigils in this game. It's even worse than runes that you just never consider using. Sorry from me, again, during my PvP days, and I'm like desperately trying to min-max and find all these cool things I can do, you'd have a bit of an interesting decision to make at the Rune Merchant, but you go to the Sigil Merchant, and they have it separated in all these categories, and it's like, okay, pick a single sigil, and then just go to one that gives you flat stats, because all these other sigils are now useless because only one will ever proc. It was really lame, but now I'll be looking through all of them and they could all be viable in their own sense and combined together in cool ways. Alright, again, largely that was stuff we already knew. Here's for something slightly new. They're talking about the sigils that were stacking sigils and would grant you invulnerability when you got to 25 stacks, or 26 stacks, I think it actually was. At least in PvP it was. They mentioned the Sigil of Conjuring, which I've never heard of, and I couldn't find on Wiki, but apparently it did the same thing as the Sigil of Sanctuary. These were both that gave you that invulnerability, and it was wildly inconsistent and difficult to ever use meaningfully, especially like in PvP, where if you're invulnerable, you're decapping a node anywhere. Just so bad, sigils. Well, they've changed them because they were identical. One of them now, instead of giving you vulnerability at 25 stacks, will instead give you quickness, which, you know, if you're on a class that has no access to quickness, could be quite nice. And the other one is being renamed and rebalanced completely. A totally new sigil coming to the game called the Sigil of Benevolence. Yesterday I talked to you guys about that trait that they announced for Elementalist Grandmaster Water that heals everyone around you for 25% more. Well, this is a sigil that works with the same kind of mechanic. So you could run an Ellie with that Grandmaster, and you could run this sigil and then try and be like like a healing power Ellie. And again, this is like, yesterday I talked about how that one Grandmaster alone won't make support viable, but amongst many other small changes it might. This is, again, one of those small changes. You can see the synergy there, and maybe it'll be worthwhile going for. I will do an update video. Now that I know both of these exist, I will do an update video on a healing power, like maybe staff build. We'll see how it goes. But that's pretty much it, aside from some funny typos, like when this originally came up, they were calling the Sigil of Air and Fire the Sigil of Fire and Ice, but I've noticed now that I've gone back to the post, it's been rectified. That's pretty much everything they announce here. The post does end with some general changes to class balance, but I'm not reading much, if anything, here that's really worth going over that you guys wouldn't be expecting from previous information we've had, and besides, the video's gone quite long. However, there is one final thing to talk about, and this was what was revealed in the Ready Up livestream the devs did earlier. Yesterday they announced 1 of 5 new Grandmasters that coming to every single class. On Ready Up they gave us the rest of those changes. This is not going to be a running commentary about how each of them affects balance and what I think. This is the kind of thing I'm seeing a lot of comments, people saying, oh, this is bad, this is good, this is bad. But I do want to run you guys through some of the more interesting ones that stood out to me, and there'll be a link in the description to a Reddit thread where you can read every single one if you like. And this is what we'll wrap the video up on. Elementalists. Yesterday we had Aquatic Benevolence. You heal allies for 25% more. One of the craziest ones for Ellie is Stone Heart, the new Earth Grandmaster. You cannot be critically hit while attuned to Earth. That is unbelievable. And discussions on how OP it might be aside, it does introduce a little bit into Ellie gameplay that I feel like is lacking, and that's the idea of sticking in an attunement. Usually you're just rotating constantly, but sticking in Earth when you know a lot of damage it should be coming at you because you know you can't be crit, but while you're there you have worse skills in theory. That's kind of an interesting idea. That's crazy. Another one that stood out for me for Ellie was the air one. If you manage to interrupt someone, it also strikes them with a lightning bolt that does damage and causes weakness on them, and weakness is OP since they changed it, so that's pretty cool. Engineer has one where whenever they crit someone, they lay a mine at their feet. A lot of people talk about with engineers that they want turrets to be stronger. I think mines are a really cool idea as well, and like mines are just really bad. However, this trait means that if you're just standing at range, just nuking the poop out of people, say with nades, you basically create a minefield around yourself, and when someone finally comes to try and kill you, they have this immense field of mines to navigate. That's very cool, and it's only got a 2-second cooldown on creating each new mine, which is why it sounds very interesting to me. The Guardian has 2 pretty cool ones. Number 1 is the idea that burning will do 33% more damage, and the other one is a trait called Radiant Retaliation that changes how much damage retaliation does. Currently it scales with power, but this will change it to scale with condition damage, making it a lot stronger. And this is really weird. I have a discussion in Visual Wood coming up with Matt Visual where we talk about the idea of Condi classes in Guild Wars 2 are currently you're really only viable playing a Condi character if you have a wide range of Condis to put out, and this is why you don't really see Guardians playing pure Condi, because all they really get is burning and blind. But with these 2 traits, you might see that you have it's actually worthwhile playing into condition damage, even on a class that doesn't necessarily have a bunch of different Condis to throw out. If your burns are hitting like a truck, and every time someone attacks you, they're taking crazy damage anyway because of your retail, maybe that would be a very interesting thing to see actually be implemented in the game. Mesmer has a new jewel in Grandmaster that caught my eye, which is they gain distortion whenever they kill an enemy, and if that stacks up and keeps going up, I'd love to see what that's like in PvE, if you just go and wreck a huge hive of really low-level mobs or easy-to-kill mobs, or, you know, even in some dungeons this happens at some points, and see how many seconds of invulnerability or evasion, I guess it is because it's distortion, you can get on your Mesmer. That sounds pretty cool. Necromancer, I don't know, not many of them interested me that much, but the Soul Reaping one is Life Blast heals allies as it passes through. I feel like the base heal on that must be quite high, otherwise everyone's going to look over it, and if it is quite high, again, it's another thing where they're sort of angling towards support. I'm sure there are other things there that are exciting, many different necros, like Dark Path converting Condis could be quite cool, but largely actually not that significant. For Ranger, yesterday we had Read the Wind was announced. The other one that's caught my eye here is Wilderness Survival Poison Master. Poison deals 50% extra damage. It's a lot like that Guardian one, that's meaning burning does more damage. And again, like Condi Rangers sort of work, they don't have incredible Condi range, but again, here's a good example of now their poison's going to hit a lot harder. It could be worthwhile running with it, especially because now their pets will be inflicting poison on that Grandmaster too. It might bring Trap Rangers for PvP back a bit, and I quite enjoy the gameplay of Trap Rangers, so we'll see how that happens. Thieves have got like a new mechanic with these Grandmasters where you're buffed while revealed. Revealed is the debuff you get on you once you've come out of stealth to stop you instantly re-stealthing and just like blinking into the real world for a second and disappearing again. Well, these Grandmasters actually mean while you're revealed you have buffs. So the Deadly Arts one is you gain 200 power. And if you think about like the Heartseeker backstab combos, you now come out of these doing a lot more damage because you've got that power boost. And the other one yesterday, which I actually sort of dismissed I think a little bit unfairly, where you heal yourself on critical hits. Actually, I am coming around to that a bit. The first game had an assassin skill that healed you when you attacked people too. Actually, I had two. One was Way of the Master and one was something else as well. Anyway, that was a pretty cool build to do. And I don't know, this could be a fun one as well, Invigorating Precision. Last but not least is Warrior. I'm a little bit disappointed by many of the Warrior ones. I think they revealed the most OP one yesterday, but the one I think will catch people's eye is Burst Precision. Burst skills have an increased chance to critically hit, which is currently set to 100%. That might sound crazy OP to people, but I actually disagree. I think for PvE, it's basically useless because it's competing with the 15% flat damage slot, and it's not that often you want to use those burst skills anyway, and you already have a high crit chance anyway, especially in PvE, so I don't see it being that great for PvE. I don't see it being that great for World vs. World, and I don't see it being that great for PvE either. Like, you would just take a Sigil of Intelligence and you get that exact same thing. If you're thinking about like kill shot for Warrior, you'll do more damage and be better off with a Sigil of Intelligence than anything else. But yeah, there you go, guys. Those were the changes for today revealed for the feature pack. I think they're going to be going away for the weekend now, and the new one, as I said at the start of the video, will be going up on Monday. Let me know what you think of the changes. I'm guessing it's going to be a lot of skill discussion. Are you guys happy that your class was being buffed, or is it being nerfed, or is it not enough? I will be reading enthusiastically as ever. Anyway, thanks very much, guys. Have a great evening, and I'll see you next time.